Anna Strickland on fiddle, Abigail Gruber, William College on banjo, Madison Taylor on banjo, Andre Gruber on guitar, David Strickland on guitar, and Molly Sweet on bass. And where's Ricky Helmick? Everybody know why they're called Florida Crackers? He showed us today. Thanks so much, Ricky. And an actual, real, honest-to-goodness cowboy, for sure. This is a great crowd. I'm Jack Schmidt, president of the board here at the Beaches Area Historical Society, and I thank you so much for coming today to the dedication of the 1873 Oesterreicher McCormick homestead. A little background, I'm sure most of you know about this, but 40 years ago, Jean McCormick had a get-together in her living room of several beach residents to discuss preserving the history of our beaches area. Today, that dream has evolved into a beautiful museum, an early 20th century locomotive, carefully preserved buildings, a historic chapel, and now the oldest cracker house in Northeast Florida. And today, we're honored to have Jean McCormick here on the front row. Thank you so much, Jean, for what you've done. It's been a great ride, don't you think? Thank you. So everybody knows about the great campaign that we had. We had over 315 individual donors. And when you walk in today, you'll see a wall that Katie Ryder did of all the people who gave to the campaign. So make sure you can see your name on there. And we greatly appreciate everything that you've done to get us to where we are today. We do have some special benefactors I'd like to recognize real quick. The naming opportunity is that Suzanne McCormick is going to talk about is Tom Lenoble naming the cabin, or dedicated the cabin in honor of his parents. He gave us an extremely generous upfront contribution. On top of that, he gave us a big endowment so that the cabin will be maintained in perpetuity. So it was a double-edged sword, and we thank Tom so much for this, and we're sorry he couldn't be here. But it's being videotaped so he can see it later on. So our benefactors, J.E. Davis Family Charities, they gave us a $50,000 matching gift, which we of course matched. Helen Coppage, Robin E.J. Taylor, see him right down here, Joe and Renata Hickson, the City of Jacksonville, Jack and Lori Schmidt, Maxwell and Edna Dickinson, Walter Dickinson, Hugh and Kathy Oesterreicher right up front, Leor McCormick family, and Millie Michler. So thank you very much for your support. I think we have we have three of our four past presidents here, and it actually took 4 presidents to get this cabin here, believe it or not. David Wayner's not here today. He's on a scout camp out, but Peggy Cornelius, I saw Peggy here earlier. She was president when this idea was hatched, and we thank her and Martin, our director at the time, for putting this plan together and getting us going on this. Linda Lanier, Linda's here also right in the middle. Thank you, Linda. We completed the fundraising and actually moved the cabin here when Linda was our president of the board. And Chris, I can still see her and you in her red Volvo coming across the 210 bridge through Palm Valley, right behind the cabin. Chris hanging out the window and taking video. So they recorded the whole move for everybody. Darby Brower, Darby, there he is. Thanks so much for your leadership last year. He's our immediate past president, and he took this on as a personal project. He really pushed this cabin through in terms of the refurbishment, and you'll see what he and Bob White did. And of course, Sam Hall was head of our facilities committee, did for this great cabin. We have a 16-member board, very strong one, very supportive. It's a truly hands-on board. Bill Carter, I don't think Bill's here today, but he owns Cheo Framing, and he's done all the framing in here, hung the pictures, hung the donor board, so we thank Bill so much for everything he's done for the museum. Brant Lambert, where's Brant? We just voted him Board of Director of the Year. And that's mostly because everything that you see that got this cabin set up for today, Brant had a lot to do with it. and he does a whole bunch on our campus, so we greatly appreciate that, Brant. Afterwards, he's going to be stringing Christmas lights throughout the park if anybody wants to help out, because he even does that. I don't think Noriko is here, but Noriko Stern is on our board, and she is head of the Master Gardeners Program and our Heritage Garden over here. She's been very patient during our construction, but all the vegetables will be put back here fairly soon, and she and Greg Burkhart with Rockaway Landscape have overseen all the landscaping for our grounds here and for the cabin, so we thank both of them for sure. Keith Baker, he's over there in the corner. When you go inside, you will see the original dining table that Thomas Oesterreicher built back in the 1800s for his family of 12. And we wanted to make sure we preserved that, so Keith was able to build some rustic legs for the table out of wood that came from the cabin. And if you look in there, underneath the top of the table top, facing the window where Michael is a little drawer. And Thomas Oesterreicher was so German that he had this drawer, he built this drawer, and he had his fork and knife in that drawer. Nobody else in the family could touch it. So make sure you see that drawer when you go in. But thanks so much, Keith, for everything you've done. I think he's probably our longest serving volunteer, and he does anything and everything here at the museum. So we thank you so much. Bob White is here. Bob is our contractor. As Linda knows, when she was president, we moved the cabin here, and then we said, well, what do we do with it? We need to make sure we refurbish it as authentic as possible, but at the same time up to code, because we're actually using it, as you see when you go inside as restrooms. So Bob White has done several historical buildings for the Mandarin Historical Society and different history parks around the state. So Bob, thank you so much for your work and your guidance. I know everybody here got an outstanding invitation, and we thought it was beautiful, along with all the collateral for our campaign and everything we do here at the museum. And we thank Katie Ryder with Morgan McKenzie Design. Katie's here somewhere. Thanks so much, Katie. Yeah. You do a great job, and you're very, very talented. We certainly thank you for that. As I said earlier, we hatched this idea when Peggy Cornelius and David Wayner were presidents. And Martin van der Gugte, where's Martin? Is here, right back here. Everybody knows Martin. Martin was our executive director, and he actually put the cabin project plan down. That's his forte, and he put all the guidelines down in terms of how we raise funds, how we're going to put the whole program together. So we greatly appreciate everything that Martin did in promoting and moving the cabin here. Yeah. And finally, our great staff, led by Chris Hoffman up front. They do a fantastic job. Chris has been with us for 3 years. She's overseen tremendous progress here at the Beach Museum, and all assets and areas that we have in the historical. She does a great job with that, and her staff is outstanding. They put all this together, and they do all the events that we have here. So thanks so much for the staff and to Chris. So we have two very special people, very special to me and very special to the beach community, people here to speak with you today. Michel Oesterreicher, who many of you know. Yeah! Wrote this outstanding book. If you haven't read it, we have it in our bookstore in the museum, and it's outstanding. It talks about the family history and all the kids who were born in this little cabin. So it's an outstanding book. A lot of Oesterreichers are here, and hope you guys have read it. But if you need a copy, we've got it. But it's an outstanding book. And so about 4 years ago, Martin, you'll remember we have an annual San Pablo Annual Giving Society here, and about 10 or 12 of us went out. Michael was our guest, and she sat in this living room and told us the history and about all the people who were born in the cabin and the man who built the cabin. And we all looked at each other and said, we have got to save this. So that was our inspiration. So I'd like Michel Oesterreicher to come up and share her family history with you. Yeah!
Good morning. What a beautiful, beautiful day we have. And I just want to say thank you all for being here. And thank you to all the people who contributed to this, whether with their labor and their sweat or with their finances. You have really fulfilled a dream and a prayer. I worried so much about this cabin that when they decided to build Nocatee, that they would come out and just mow it down and it would be gone forever. Such a big part of our family history. So I'm going to give you a little brief history of the cabin and some of the people who were born in that cabin. My grandfather, Thomas Edward Oesterreicher, was born on Spring Island, South Carolina, in 1856. His father, Jacob, was an overseer on a plantation of 350 to 500 slaves, which is nothing really to brag about, but it does show he had managerial skills. Anyway, and recently an archaeologist working in that area on Spring Island contacted me and said, I found your great-grandfather's name in a ledger where he was paid by the owner of the plantation. And that was really wonderful to me because, you hear all these family stories, and as often as like in the book, I tried to document as many of the stories as possible so that I wasn't giving false history. But that's one that I hadn't, documented, so I was happy to have that story. So my grandfather was born in 1856. The Civil War broke out in 1861, and Jacob, my great-grandfather, took off to scout for the Confederate Army. I mean, those Oesterreichers knew the woods. They always were woodsmen. So he was able to scout in the islands, sea islands, and swamps around what most of us know as Hilton Head Island, but this was Spring Island. So, anyway, after the war, Thomas went with his uncles, John and Will Michler, came down to Florida. And while he was here, he was probably only 11 or 12 years old. They came on horseback. And while they were here, he ended up seeing a plot of land on Durbin Swamp. And it was beautiful land. And it was rich land. And it reminded him of the land he had grown up on Spring Island. And so eventually, Jacob and his wife, Catherine Michler Oesterreicher, and by the way, that's the connection the Oesterreichers have with the Michlers, okay? Catherine Michler was my great-grandmother. And so eventually they moved down, and I am thinking it must have been Jacob, but possibly Thomas, that homesteaded 36 acres out there. And in 1873, Jacob and Catherine were both dead. So Thomas was 17 years old, the oldest of 5 children, and really for a while was the caretaker of that group of children. Eventually, some relatives came and got the younger children. But Tom, in 1873, built this cabin. Now, what he did was he went into Durbin Swamp, cut down the cypress trees, hewed them into these boards that you see up here. So the original cabin is this left side of the cabin. And he lived in that cabin, and in 1880, he married my grandmother, Ella Ortegas, a young Menorcan girl whose father was a policeman in Jacksonville, and she had been educated by the sisters at Immaculate Conception. She was 14 years old when he married her. She was 24. And by the time she was 15, she had her oldest child. And that child, her first child, that child was Dorothea Oesterreicher. Okay, and we called her Dora. Later, Dora married B.B. McCormick. And that's the McCormick connection. People ask me, oh, well, how have y'all connected, you know? Well, Dora married a McCormick, and I'll tell you that story. But eventually, Tom and Ella had 10 children. The 10th child died 2 or 3 days after she was born, and she is buried out at Sampson Cemetery. The last boy to be born was my father, Hugh G. Oesterreicher, and he was